The fog came in off Larkspur Cove the way it always did in October, slow, deliberate, swallowing the lighthouse first, then the pier, then the row of dark boathouses where Micah Doran spent most of his nights sanding hulls nobody else wanted to touch. He didn't hear the footsteps until they were already inside the boathouse doorway. "You're late," the voice said. Low. Rough at the edges, like something that hadn't been used in years. "I've been standing on that dock for 20 minutes. Micah straightened from the hull of the old sloop he was refinishing, sawdust clinging to his forearms, and turned toward the silhouette in the doorway, tall, coat soaked through at the shoulders, dark hair pushed back by the wind. "I think you've got the wrong." The man crossed the boathouse in 4 strides and stopped less than an arm's length away, and whatever Micah had been about to say dried up in his throat. Because the stranger was looking at him like a man looks at something he's been afraid doesn't exist anymore. "Eli," the man breathed. It wasn't a question. Micah opened his mouth to correct him. "My name is Micah, you must be thinking of somebody else," but the words never came. Later, he wouldn't be able to explain why. Maybe it was the way the man's hand had come up, trembling, like he needed to touch something solid to believe it was real. Maybe it was the raw, unguarded hope on a face that otherwise looked like it hadn't allowed itself hope in a very long time. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe Micah, who hadn't been looked at like he mattered to anyone in longer than he wanted to admit, just wanted to know what it felt like for one more minute. "You're soaked," Micah said instead, which wasn't a lie, and wasn't the truth either. The man laughed, short, disbelieving, wet at the edges. 12 years, he said, and that's the first thing you say to me. 12 years. Micah filed the number away like a splinter under skin, something to deal with later, once his heart stopped slamming against his ribs. "You should get out of the rain," Micah said carefully. The man nodded, still staring, still not quite believing. "Right. Yes. Of course." He extended a hand that Micah, God help him, shook. The man's grip was cold and certain. "Julian," he said, as though Micah wouldn't already know that, as though Eli would already know that. "I didn't think, I heard you'd left. Everyone told me you'd left the cove for good." "Guess everyone was wrong," Micah said, and hated himself a little for how easily it came out. Micah didn't sleep that night. He sat on the porch of the small clapboard house he shared with his grandfather, mug of black coffee cooling in his hands, and turned the strange encounter over and over like a stone he couldn't skip flat. Julian. The name meant nothing to him. But the cove was small, and money like that didn't move through small coves without leaving a wake, so by morning, over eggs and the crackle of the radio, his grandfather Sam supplied the rest without being asked. "Voss," the old man said, not looking up from his plate. His hands, knotted with arthritis, still moved with the precision of a man who'd kept a lighthouse running for 40 years. "Thistlewood Voss. The shipping family. Boy inherited the whole island estate when his brother passed last spring." He paused. "Didn't expect him back here. Not after what happened." "What happened?" Sam's eyes lifted, sharp despite the cataracts starting to cloud them. "Why do you ask?" Micah thought about lying. He was good at small lies. "I'm fine, I ate already, the boat's almost done." But something about his grandfather's face, the sudden stillness in it, made him choose honesty instead. "He mistook me for someone last night. Called me Eli." The coffee mug in Sam's hand went very still. "You said something, right?" his grandfather asked. "You told him he was wrong." Micah looked down at his plate. "I didn't get the chance." It wasn't the whole truth, and Sam's silence told Micah his grandfather knew it. "Eli Calloway," Sam said finally, quietly, like the name cost him something to say. "Julian's boy." They were together, back before it was easy to be, before this town knew what to do with 2 men in love who didn't hide it. Beautiful thing, watching them. Then there was an accident. Storm came up fast, boat went down past Widow's Point. They found the hull. Never found Eli. The fog outside seemed to press closer against the windows. That was 12 years ago, Micah said slowly. To the season, Sam agreed. He studied Micah for a long moment, searching his face the way he hadn't in years, like he was looking for something he'd once known and had chosen to forget. You do favor him, some. Around the eyes. Never noticed it before. Grandpa. Whatever you're thinking of doing, Sam said, standing, gathering the plates with hands that shook more than they used to, think twice before you do it. Grief makes people reckless. Both the griever and whoever's foolish enough to stand still long enough to be mistaken for the dead. He said it like a warning. Micah heard it like something else, a door, cracked open, that he hadn't yet decided whether to walk through. Julian Voss found him 3 days later, this time in daylight, at the market on Harbor Street, and this time he didn't call him by the wrong name. I owe you an apology, he said, falling into step beside Micah without invitation. Up close, in the gray afternoon light, he looked less like the ghost-struck man from the boathouse and more like what he was, exhausted, expensively dressed, carrying something heavy that had nothing to do with luggage. I was, not myself, the other night. I'd just come back to the island for the first time in years, and I saw you in that light, and I... It's fine, Micah said. It's not. I frightened you. You didn't. That, at least, was true. Micah had felt many things standing in that boathouse, startled, curious, something warmer than either, but never afraid. Julian studied him, the same searching look Sam had given him at breakfast, though Julian's had none of the grandfather's wariness in it. His was open. Hungry, almost, in a way that made Micah's pulse do something complicated. I don't even know your name, Julian said. Here it was. The moment. The easy exit, Micah, and you've got me confused with a dead man, I'm sorry for your loss. 2 sentences. It would have ended everything cleanly, the way Sam wanted, the way sense demanded. Micah, he said. Just that. He let the silence do the rest of the lying for him. Something flickered across Julian's face, surprise, maybe disappointment, quickly smoothed over by good manners and old money. Micah, he repeated, like he was testing how it felt in his mouth after 12 years of a different name living there. Would you let me buy you dinner? As an apology. Nothing more than that. Micah should have said no. He thought about his grandfather's warning, about the hollow place in Julian's eyes that had nothing to do with him and everything to do with a boy who drowned before Micah had even moved to this cove. Dinner became a walk along the tide line became, 3 weeks later, an invitation to the island itself, Thistlewood, the Voss family estate, a sprawling stone house perched over the water like it was daring the sea to try again. Julian gave him the tour himself, no staff trailing behind. Just the 2 of them and the sound of gulls and Julian's voice going quiet and strange whenever they passed certain rooms. This was the conservatory, he said, hand trailing along a doorframe he didn't walk through. We used to sit out here in the evenings. Read to each other. Terrible poetry, mostly. He had opinions about poetry. Julian never said the name anymore, not since that first night. It hung in every sentence anyway, an absence shaped exactly like a person. Micah should have asked who, should have played the stranger he actually was. Instead he found himself saying, gently, what kind of opinions? Julian looked at him, really looked, the way he had in the boathouse, and for a moment something in his face cracked open, raw and unguarded. He thought most of it was cowardly, Julian said. Poets hiding behind metaphor instead of just saying the true thing. He used to tell me that if he loved someone, he'd want them to hear it plainly. No metaphor. Just, I love you, said straight, like a fact instead of a feeling you're embarrassed by. The wind moved through the conservatory glass. Micah felt the words land somewhere under his ribs and stay there. He sounds like he knew what he wanted, Micah said quietly. He did. Julian's throat worked. I've spent 12 years wishing I'd said it back to him that plainly. Instead I made a joke of it. The last real conversation we had, and I made a joke. Micah wanted, more than he'd wanted almost anything, to reach out and take his hand. He didn't. Not yet. Instead he said, he probably knew anyway. People usually do. Julian's eyes met his, and something passed between them that had nothing to do with the dead boy and everything to do with the two living men standing in a room full of his ghost. "Thank you," Julian said, "for listening to an old man's grief." "You're not old," Micah said. "And I don't mind." He meant it. That was the problem. The storm rolled in on a Tuesday, the kind that made the whole cove batten down out of memory rather than warning, and Micah, halfway to the ferry dock when the sky broke open, ended up soaked and shivering on Thistlewood's front steps, pounding on a door he had no real right to be pounding on. Julian answered in a half-buttoned shirt, hair damp from his own dash across the property, and didn't ask questions. He simply pulled Micah inside, tulled dry blankets around his shoulders, and built a fire in a hearth that looked like it hadn't been lit in years. "You could have called," Julian said, crouched by the flames, not quite looking at him. "I don't have your number." That got a small, surprised laugh out of him, the first one Micah had heard that didn't sound like it hurt on the way out. "Fair." They sat together on the floor in front of the fire while the storm threw itself against the windows, and somewhere in the second hour, after the tea, after the silence that had stopped being awkward and become something closer to comfortable, Julian said, without any preamble at all. "I keep waiting for you to tell me I'm imagining the resemblance." Micah's whole body went still. "I'm not," Julian went on, staring into the fire instead of at him, which was somehow worse. "Imagining it. I know you're not him. I know Eli is gone, I identified what was left of that boat myself, 12 years ago, I know exactly what the ocean took from me. But there's something in the way you tilt your head when you're deciding whether to trust someone. Something in your hands. And I keep telling myself it doesn't matter why I started paying attention to you, because somewhere in these 3 weeks, it stopped being about him." He finally looked over. "It became about you. Micah. Not a ghost wearing your face." The fire popped. Micah's chest ached with something too large for the room. "Tell him," said the part of his mind that sounded like his grandfather. "Tell him now, before this goes any further, before either of you can be hurt worse than you already are." But Julian was looking at him with an expression Micah hadn't been on the receiving end of in longer than he wanted to count, not grief, not memory, just plain and simple want, and the confession stayed lodged behind his teeth. "I'm not going anywhere," Micah said instead. Which was true. Which was also, somehow, another kind of lie. Julian's hand found his in the firelight. Neither of them pulled away. The first kiss happened 2 weeks after the storm, on the boathouse dock at dusk, salt air thick around them, Julian's hands cold and careful on Micah's jaw like he was afraid too much pressure would make him disappear. "Is this all right?" Julian murmured against his mouth, giving him every chance to say no. "Yes," Micah said, and meant it with his whole chest, and kissed him again to prove it. For a while after that, the world narrowed pleasantly. Mornings folding into the boatyard, evenings unfolding at Thistlewood. Julian laughed more. Ate more. Slept, according to the dark circles finally fading from beneath his eyes, more than he had in years. Micah watched him come back to life one ordinary day at a time and let himself believe, foolishly, that maybe this could just be theirs, a new thing, built on the bones of an old sorrow, but not defined by it. He should have known better. Small coves keep small secrets badly. It was his grandfather who finally broke it open, on a gray Sunday when Julian came to the house for dinner for the first time, Sam's idea, though Micah suspected an interrogation more than hospitality. Sam watched Julian across the table all evening with the wary, measuring look of a man deciding whether to fire a warning shot. He waited until the plates were cleared to do it. "You know," Sam said, voice mild in the way that meant it wasn't, "my grandson's mother, my daughter, she used to keep company with a boy from this cove, years back. Before Micah was born. Boy who left for the city and never came back. Same family as the Callaways, if I recall." Cousins, maybe. The table went silent. Micah's stomach dropped through the floor. Small world, Sam said, eyes cutting to Micah, sharp as a blade, how a face can travel down a bloodline. Julian didn't say anything on the ferry ride back to Thistlewood. He didn't say anything as they walked up the long gravel path to the house, or as he poured 2 glasses of something amber and didn't drink from his. He set the glass down with exaggerated care, like a man handling something that might shatter. Cousins, he said finally. You're related to him. To Eli. Micah's hands were shaking. He pressed them flat against his thighs to stop it. I don't know. My grandfathers never told me much about my mother's side. I never met her, she left when I was small, and I never asked, because it never mattered before. He forced himself to meet Julian's eyes. It might be true. I don't know for certain. But that's not, Julian, that's not why I didn't tell you. Then why? Julian's voice cracked on the word, all the careful composure of the last 2 months finally breaking loose. Why let me stand in that boathouse and say his name to your face and not correct me? Why let me tell you things about him I've never told another living soul, and just, let me, knowing what you knew? Because for one night, Micah said, and his own voice broke now too, somebody looked at me like I mattered enough to grieve for. And I have never, not once in my whole life, had that. I know how selfish that sounds. I know I should have said something the very first minute. I didn't want it to stop. Julian turned away from him, shoulders rigid, staring out at the dark water past the conservatory glass, the same water that had taken the boy he loved 12 years ago and never given him back. I don't know what's real anymore, he said quietly. I don't know if I fell for you, or if I fell for the version of him you let me believe was standing in front of me. Then ask yourself which one made you laugh again, Micah said. Which one you told about the fire, and the storm, and your brother, and every ordinary Tuesday for the last 2 months. Because I promise you, Julian, Eli never did any of that. I did. Micah did. Whatever's between us, it grew out of the truth, even if it started in a lie I should never have let stand. Julian didn't answer. And Micah, throat tight, let himself out into the night, the door closing softly behind him like the end of something he hadn't been ready to lose that he didn't hear from Julian for 11 days. Micah threw himself into the boatyard the way he always had before Julian Voss walked into it, sanding, varnishing, hands busy so his mind wouldn't have to be. His grandfather watched him with a guilt he never quite voiced but wore plainly enough on his face. The old man had meant to protect him, not gut him, and both of them knew it, and neither of them said it aloud, because that was how their family had always managed grief, quietly, and alone. On the 12th day, a letter arrived. Actual paper, actual ink, delivered by hand to the boathouse door. Micah. I went to Widow's Point yesterday for the first time in 12 years. I used to be able to stand there and feel him, his laugh in the wind, the shape of him in every wave. I stood there yesterday and felt nothing but salt and cold, and I understood, finally, that he has been gone a very long time, and that grieving him has become something I do out of habit rather than necessity. I am not writing to tell you I forgive the lie. I am still angry about the lie, and I suspect I will be for a while yet. I am writing because somewhere between the boathouse and the storm and the fire and every ordinary Tuesday, I stopped grieving Eli long enough to fall for you, not the resemblance, not the ghost, but the actual, infuriating, dishonest, wonderful man who let me be sad in front of him without flinching. He never let me be sad. Did you know that? Eli hated my sadness, tried to talk me out of it every time it surfaced, like it embarrassed him. You just sat with mine. Every time. I don't know what that means for us. I know I'd like to find out, if you're willing to be honest with me from here forward, every day, plainly, the way he always said love should be spoken. I'll be at the lighthouse tonight at dusk. I understand completely if you don't come. J. Micah read it 4 times before his hand stopped shaking enough to fold it. The lighthouse stood exactly where it always had, at the edge of the cove where his grandfather had spent 40 years keeping ships from the rocks, and Julian was standing at its base when Micah arrived, coat collar turned up against the evening wind, looking like a man who'd been waiting there far longer than dusk required. "You came," Julian said. "I owed you that much." Micah stopped a few feet away, hands jammed in his pockets, heart going too fast. "I owe you more than that, actually." "I'm sorry, Julian. Not for what grew between us, I won't apologize for that, because it was real, every part of it was real, but for the beginning. You deserved the truth from the first night. I took something from you that wasn't mine to take." "You did," Julian agreed simply. Then, after a breath, "and I've decided I'm not interested in spending whatever time we have left being angry about a lie born out of loneliness, when I know exactly what loneliness does to a person's judgment. I've had 12 years of practice." He crossed the distance between them, slow, deliberate, giving Micah every chance to step back. Micah didn't. "I want to do this honestly," Julian said, close now, his breath visible in the cooling air. "No ghost standing between us. No ambiguity. Just, plainly, the way he always said it should be." His hand came up to Micah's jaw, thumb tracing the same line it had that first night in the firelight. "I love you. Not the resemblance. Not the memory. You, sawdust and stubbornness and the way you sit with people's sadness instead of running from it. I love you, Micah Doran, and I'd like the chance to say it to the right man for the rest of however long we both get." Micah's eyes stung. Behind them, the lighthouse beam swept its slow, steady circle across the darkening water, the same light his grandfather had kept burning for 40 years so that no one else would be lost to that cove the way Eli had been. "I love you too," Micah said, plainly, the way he'd been taught it should be said. "I have for a while. I just didn't know how to say it without the lie standing between us." "There's no lie between us now," Julian said. "No," Micah agreed. "Just us." He closed the last of the distance and kissed him, not the careful, disbelieving kiss of that first night on the dock, but something steadier, something built out of honesty instead of grief, out of two men choosing each other in full daylight instead of fog. Above them, the lighthouse kept turning, patient and constant, throwing its light out across the water and calling everyone safely home.